Echoes. In the dimly lit hospital, the atmosphere was heavy with the weight of the past and the uncertainty of the future. It was 1972 in Macon County, Alabama, a time when secrets whispered in the halls mingled with the scent of antiseptic. Mary, a young black woman, lay on a sterile table, her body racked with pain. Surrounded by nurses and a doctor dressed in the aftermath of a recent surgery, Mary's wide eyes pleaded for relief that words couldn't convey. As the medical staff trailed out of the room, leaving Mary alone in her agony, her determination flickered to life. Weak limbs protested as she struggled to rise, the pain a relentless companion. With sheer willpower, Mary found herself on her feet, clinging to nearby surfaces for support. Each step was a battle against her own body, but the urgency of escape propelled her forward. Outside the room, Mary's gaze pierced through the glass windows, tracking the movements of the nurses. Their murmurs were lost to her ears, but she knew her moment would come when they were gone. She reached the doors, then with painstaking effort, she shuffled down the hall. The front door beckoned like a beacon of hope, but before Mary could reach it, she was intercepted by Willard, the security officer. His voice sliced through the night air, a warning amidst her desperate plea for help. As Mary stumbled down the steps, her cries echoed into the darkness, drawing the attention of bystanders whose concern mirrored her own terror. With trembling hands and tear-streaked cheeks, Mary clung to her rescuers, their comforting presence a balm to her fractured soul. In the days that followed, she recounted her harrowing ordeal to anyone who would listen, each retelling embellished with new details and whispered warnings. Doctors and staff were arrested for their crimes, and the hospital was forced to close its doors. As the years passed, Mary's tale took on a life of its own, evolving into a cautionary fable passed down through generations. And though the truth of her ordeal may have faded with time, the legend of Mary's night of terror lived on, a chilling reminder of the dangers that lay hidden just beyond the safety of the threshold. It's now 2024, and the tale continues with Isaiah Hall, rousing from a restless slumber, his weary gaze fixed upon the ceiling bathed in the ethereal glow of dawn. A cascade of sunlight pierces through the dust-laden air, casting spectral shadows across his modest abode. Isaiah grimaces, his hand instinctively reaching for his phone, only to be met with the chilling revelation of 8 missed calls from his relentless lawyer. His lawyer had given him until the end of the week to complete his payments, or he would be sent back to jail. For the 4th time, Isaiah had been fired from another job, and his future did not seem to be getting any brighter. It never had been. In the dimly lit recesses of his urban dwelling, Isaiah paces anxiously, his mind torn between the weight of financial woes and the allure of fleeting distractions. Amidst the haze of smoke from his pipe, Isaiah's attention is drawn to a flyer sitting on his table, bearing the promise of employment at Security Force Inc., a beacon of opportunity amidst the encroaching darkness. As the sun starts to set, Isaiah finds comfort with his sister Kenya. She's always been there for him, even when times get tough. Their small talk fills the air, a brief respite from the weight of Isaiah's troubles. But as darkness falls, he's back to the heaviness of depression. On his way back home, he notices his elderly neighbor sitting on her porch. He nods in her direction, and she returns it as she rocks back and forth in her rocking chair. "You gotta face your fears, young man," she began to mumble incoherently. "All right, Miss Mary," he replied while shaking his head. The effects of trauma seems to be an everlasting stigma in this community. Late at night, when the streets are empty and the city sleeps, Isaiah's reflection twists into something monstrous. His heart pounds in his chest as he stares at the distorted image in the bathroom mirror, wondering if he's losing his mind. But when he blinks, the reflection is back to normal, leaving him with a sense of unease that he can't shake. When he finally falls asleep, his dreams are haunted by visions of his childhood. He sees the house where he grew up, the place where his nightmares began. The memories flood back, each one more terrifying than the last. He sees his mother cooking something in the kitchen, humming a familiar tune. His older sister is sitting abnormally close to the television. He took in the serene scene for a moment before a large man stepped out of the shadows and stalked toward him. His features were still shrouded in darkness as he seemed to grow larger and larger with every step. He wakes up sweating, his heart racing, grateful to be back in the real world. Isaiah took a deep breath as he stepped through the worn doors of the hospital, the weight of his new role settling heavily on his shoulders. The security uniform he wore felt unfamiliar and uncomfortable, a stark contrast to the disheveled state of the building he was meant to protect. Overgrown vines snaked their way up the walls, and the once manicured landscaping now lay in disarray. Inside, the hospital was dimly lit by flickering LED lights, casting long shadows down the empty hallways. Isaiah made his way to the security office, guided by the faint glow emanating from within. As he approached, he could hear the soft snoring of the officer inside, his feet propped up on the table, uniform stained with food. Isaiah wrinkled his nose at the smell that wafted out of the room before knocking on the door to announce his presence. The officer startled awake, blinking rapidly as he took in Isaiah's presence. "Oh, hey," he mumbled, rubbing his eyes. "You must be the new guy." Isaiah nodded, feeling a surge of nervous energy coursing through him. "Yeah, that's me." The officer, whose name Isaiah learned was John, gave him a quick rundown of his duties before heading out for some much-needed sleep. Left alone in the dimly lit office, Isaiah felt a sense of unease settle over him. The fluorescent blue light from the security screens cast an eerie glow over the room, illuminating the various corners and crevices with an otherworldly hue. As the night wore on, Isaiah found himself growing restless. He fidgeted with the buttons on the control panel, trying in vain to fix a malfunctioning camera. Frustration gnawed at him as he struggled to make sense of the tangled mess of wires and circuits before him. Finally, he gave up and reached for the phone, dialing the number for his supervisor. "Hello?" came the groggy voice on the other end of the line. "Hey," Isaiah began, his voice tinged with apology. "I'm sorry to bother you, but one of the cameras stopped working." There was a long pause before the supervisor responded, his words slow and deliberate. "Okay," he said finally. Isaiah waited, expecting further instructions, but none came. "So, what should I do?" he pressed, feeling a knot of anxiety tightening in his chest. "You gotta go check it out," the supervisor replied. "And if you see anything suspicious, call the police. Remember, observe and report." Isaiah nodded, even though he knew the supervisor couldn't see him. "Got it," he said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. With a sinking feeling in the pit of his stomach, Isaiah hung up the phone and made his way out into the darkened hallways, his footsteps echoing in the empty corridors. As he approached the malfunctioning camera, a sense of dread washed over him, the weight of the unknown pressing down on him like a lead weight. Little did Isaiah know his first night on the job was about to take a terrifying turn. With a quick glance around the dimly lit security office, he grabbed his phone and pocketed it, the familiar weight providing some small comfort in the darkness. Taking a deep breath to steady his nerves, Isaiah stepped out into the hallway, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the shadows like a knife. The air was heavy with the musty scent of old linens and decay, sending a shiver down his spine as he began to make his way towards the south corridor. As he walked, Isaiah's footsteps echoed loudly in the empty hallway, the sound of his own breathing the only other noise in the silence. But then, just as he was beginning to relax, he heard it, the faint scuttling noise that seemed to emanate from the darkness ahead. Isaiah froze, his heart pounding in his chest as he strained to listen. The noise grew louder, more urgent, filling the air with a sense of dread that made his skin crawl. With a sinking feeling in the pit of his stomach, he realized that he was not alone in the hospital corridors. Summoning all his courage, Isaiah turned towards the sound, his flashlight trembling in his hand as he prepared to confront whatever lurked in the shadows. He saw quick movement in the corner of his eye. Isaiah's heart hammered in his chest as he frantically scanned the dimly lit hallway, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The beam of his flashlight trembled as he swept it across the floor, searching for any sign of movement. But there was nothing. Just the eerie silence of the deserted hospital corridors. Taking a shaky breath, Isaiah tried to calm his racing thoughts. Maybe it was just his imagination playing tricks on him, he reasoned. Or perhaps it was just a harmless dog scurrying through the shadows. But deep down, he knew there was something more sinister at play. With a trembling hand, Isaiah gripped his phone tighter, the light casting eerie shadows on the walls as he continued down the hallway. The faint scuttling noise echoed in his ears, growing louder with each passing moment. He quickened his pace, his heart pounding in his chest as he searched for the source of the sound. Suddenly, the noise stopped, leaving Isaiah standing alone in the darkness. He paused, his breath catching in his throat as he strained to listen for any sign of movement. But there was nothing, just an oppressive silence that seemed to suffocate him. As Isaiah turned to continue down the hallway, the sound returned, louder and more urgent than before. His pulse quickened as he spun around, the beam of his flashlight slicing through the darkness. And that's when he saw it. A twisted figure crouched on all fours, its blackened skin gleaming in the dim light. Isaiah's blood ran cold as he stared into the empty sockets where the creature's eyes should have been, its mouth gaping open in a silent scream. He stumbled backwards, his mind reeling with horror as he realized what he was seeing. Without a second thought, Isaiah turned and fled, his footsteps echoing loudly in the empty corridors as he ran for his life. Panic surged through him, driving him forward as he raced away from the twisted creature that lurked in the darkness. His heart pounding in his chest, Isaiah burst into the nearest office and slammed the door shut behind him. He fumbled for his phone in the darkness, his hands shaking as he desperately tried to find a signal. But to his dismay, there was no service. Cursing under his breath, he glanced around the dimly lit room, searching for any sign of escape. He saw a window on the far side of the room covered by a large table with bins full of dusty folders. He began moving them as fast as he could when a name on one of the folders caught his eye. Mary White. Isaiah's heart pounded in his chest as he scanned the contents of Mary White's folder, his hands trembling with a mixture of fear and curiosity. The pages were yellowed with age, the ink faded and smudged, but the words leapt off the page with chilling clarity. As he read, Isaiah felt a chill run down his spine, the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end. Mary White's file was filled with accounts of unauthorized surgeries that had taken place in 1972. Words like lobotomy and feticide jumped out at him. He sat the folder down and grabbed another. Sam Smith. He opened the folder and read, Tuskegee Study Syphilis Trial Patient 221. But before Isaiah could dwell on the horrors contained within the folder, a soft whisper filled the room, causing him to jump in alarm. "Help us," the voice murmured, its words sending a shiver down his spine. He felt the wind on the side of his face as it spoke, the sound seeming to come from all directions at once. Startled, Isaiah took a step back, his eyes darting around the dimly lit room. His mind raced with fear and confusion as he tried to make sense of what was happening. Was he imagining things? Or was there something else lurking in the shadows? Something far more sinister than he could have ever imagined? With a sinking feeling in the pit of his stomach, Isaiah realized that he was not alone in the room, and as the whispered plea for help echoed in his ears, he knew that he had to find a way out, and fast. Determined to escape the nightmarish depths of the hospital, Isaiah sprang into action. He moved quickly, pushing aside the heavy table blocking the window and revealing the night sky beyond. But his hopes were dashed when he saw that the window had been nailed shut, rendering it impossible to open. Frustration and fear surged through Isaiah as he realized that the only way out was likely the way he had come in. With no other options, he scanned the room for anything that could be used as a weapon, his eyes falling on a rusted surgery knife lying on the floor. Gripping the makeshift weapon tightly in his hand, Isaiah approached the door cautiously, his senses on high alert. He listened intently for any sign of movement, his heart pounding in his chest as he prepared to face whatever horrors lay beyond the threshold. Isaiah cautiously pushed open the door, peering down the dimly lit hallway. To his relief, it appeared empty. Without hesitation, he began to run back toward the security office, his footsteps echoing loudly in the stillness of the corridor. But as he ran, Isaiah couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The hallway seemed to stretch on endlessly, the walls closing in around him with each passing step. Confusion clouded his mind as he stopped abruptly, turning to look behind him. To his horror, the hallway seemed to elongate, stretching further and further into the darkness. Isaiah rubbed his eyes in disbelief, hoping to dispel the illusion, but the oppressive atmosphere remained. Suddenly, the lights began to flicker, casting eerie shadows that danced across the walls. Isaiah cursed under his breath, his heart pounding with fear as the darkness closed in around him. And then, emerging from the shadows at the far end of the hall, came a tall figure. Isaiah's blood ran cold as he recognized the ominous presence from his nightmares. The figure breathed heavily, its menacing aura sending a chill down Isaiah's spine. "Didn't I tell you to pick up your toys, boy?" he boomed, his voice echoing in the empty corridor. Isaiah shrank back, overcome with a primal fear that gripped him like a vice. In that moment, he felt like a helpless child again, paralyzed by the terror of impending punishment. Isaiah stumbled backward, his heart racing as he heard the chilling voice of a woman echoing through the corridor. The dim lights flickered back to life, revealing the spectral figure of his mother standing before him. His breath caught in his throat as tears welled up in his eyes, overwhelmed by the sight of her. "Don't be afraid, honey," his mother's voice echoed softly, her words both comforting and unsettling. Isaiah slowly turned toward her, his heart aching with longing. But as he looked into her eyes, he saw something unnatural in her expression, a twisted grimace that sent shivers down his spine. "Ma," he whispered, his voice trembling with emotion. But before he could take another step toward her, more figures began to materialize behind her, their forms flickering in and out of focus like phantoms. Isaiah's breath caught in his throat as he realized he was surrounded, trapped in a nightmarish vision from his past. Panic surged through him as the ghostly figures drew closer, their eyes empty and their movements unnatural. With nowhere to run, Isaiah sank to the floor, covering his ears in a desperate attempt to block out the haunting voices that filled the air. He shut his eyes tightly, trying to shut out the terrifying reality unfolding around him. "Stop it! Stop it! Stop it!" he cried out, his voice hoarse with fear and desperation. "Honey," his mother says, reaching toward him. "Don't call me that!" he yelled at his mother's apparition, his anger boiling over as he confronted the ghosts of his past. "Why didn't you protect me? You let him beat me," he pleaded, his voice breaking as he unleashed years of pent-up frustration and pain. But as the echoes of his words faded, he opened his eyes to find himself alone once more. The spectral figures vanished into the darkness, leaving him trembling and alone in the empty corridor. Isaiah's mind was still reeling from the terrifying ordeal he had just experienced as he made his way back to the security office. He was shocked to find his manager sitting inside, looking worried. "There you are. I've been calling you. Thought something may have happened to you," his manager said, his voice tinged with concern. Isaiah could only stare back at him, his thoughts consumed by the surreal events of the night. Without a word, he set the flashlight down on the desk and turned to leave the hospital behind him. As he walked out into the cool night air, Isaiah felt a sense of relief wash over him. His manager's confused expression followed him out, but he paid it no mind. He needed time to process everything that had happened. On his way home as the sun began to rise, Isaiah ran into Mary, his neighbor, sitting on her front porch as usual. Her words struck a chord with him as she spoke. "I see you faced your darkness. You got us someday," she mumbled softly. Isaiah looked at her with newfound understanding, seeing her in a different light. Without hesitation, he walked toward her and paused, unsure of what to say. Then, on impulse, he wrapped his arms around her in a tight hug. Mary embraced him back, the warmth of her presence comforting him in ways he couldn't explain. They stood there together for a moment, breathing in alignment, before Isaiah finally pulled away and continued on his way home, feeling lighter and more at peace than he had in a long time. And as he looked back at the hospital looming in the distance, he knew that he wasn't alone in his journey. With the support of those around him, he would find the strength to confront his demons and emerge stronger on the other side. For in the darkness, there was always a glimmer of hope waiting to guide him towards the light. And with each step forward, Isaiah embraced the promise of a brighter tomorrow, knowing that he was finally on the path to healing